When you start to read these things, you're stunned by it. It's so unexpected, the accounts of what took place. It says, Negroes flee from Forsyth. Enraged white people are driving blacks from county. Drive Negroes from Harrison. Negro residents in panic. If Bob Fancher leaves, there will not be a Negro in Boone County. The only conclusion that you can come to after you look at all this is that blacks feared for their lives and they fled the county. The terror was substantial, and they did not have time, in many cases, to sell their land. And after they left, a lot of them were too afraid to come back to try and negotiate any sale of land. So basically, the land is lost.
The forced expulsion of African Americans. I am shocked, yet not completely surprised, that this history has remained hidden for all these years. Elliot Jaspin has been investigating the banishment of blacks in the United States.
I was on assignment in Berryville, Arkansas. I finished up an interview and I asked the person, by the way, I've been here for 4 or 5 days now. I haven't seen a single black. Why is that? She says, oh, well, the Klan keeps them out. I decided I'd look at this a little further, and I was curious how many counties in Arkansas were white or virtually all white. So I got census data, and to my amazement, it was about a third. I said, well, what about the rest of the country? And so I expanded it even more. And again, I saw a whole series of all-white counties. In most cases, cleansings typically occurred where there was a relatively small black population. States like Kentucky, northern Georgia, Tennessee, Indiana, Missouri.
So, was there one place in your research where, a county where the greatest number of blacks were expelled?
Yeah, that clearly is Forsyth County, Georgia. There were 1,098 blacks living there in 1912. Within a matter of months, it had dropped to 30. It's the largest racial cleansing in America that I know of. It's also interesting because of this whole land question. It raises the issue of how do we cure the past in a sense? How do we come to terms with this? What do we do? When I started to research Forsyth County, one of the things that came up was a story that appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which said people were driven out, but no one lost their land. Everybody was able to sell. This didn't seem to make sense to me. So what I did was I went through every parcel of black-owned land to see, indeed, what did happen. With the black-owned land in Forsyth County, what you see is a sale from somebody to a black landowner. And then you don't see the next deed. There's no sale from Joe Smith, the black landowner, to John Doe, who is white. As you go back down the chain of title, what you find is that at some point you run into a hearing for adverse possession.
Adverse possession is the way that people have of taking title to property without buying it. And it's of great relevance in these banishment cases because as soon as the African-American owners are off the property, some white folks or other folks come on and start using it as though it's theirs, and then after a period of time, it is theirs, right? And so what you have is this combination of violence with the legal system. Violence to run folks off, and then the legal system to change title.
One of the interesting things about the Morgan Strickland land is that there was obviously an attempt to cure the title by adverse possession. Morgan Strickland buys the land. He then has to run for his life, and he leaves the land behind. I mean, he can't sell it, and so he's gone. You have a whole series of sales of the same piece of land. When you look at the public record, what you find is that when it's sold again, The lawyer that's handling that sale is Phil Bettis. He then goes on to become the head of the Biracial Commission representing Forsyth County. This is a deed. A fellow named Morgan Strickland bought a piece of property, and Morgan Strickland was black, and he left along with everybody else. This was of particular interest because when the Hesters bought a lot on lot 1012, you were the title attorney. And following it all the way back is this, which basically says the previous guy owned it by adverse possession, which is to say there never was a sale from Strickland to anyone. And this is not the only one. I found half the black-owned land apparently was never sold. Is this sort of an open secret in your community?
No. When I'm researching title back 50 years, I don't go back to 1912. That's not on my radar screen to research a title in 2005.
I'm talking about 1984, when the Hesters bought their land.
Right, I am too.
And you did the title search. You went back 50 years. That would have taken in all of these transactions, every one of them. And these transactions, the one from Teams to Terry, is clearly phony.
Phony is a harsh word for that. You're really, I'm looking at a sworn affidavit that says that title is acceptable. That's acceptable by title standards in Georgia. I think it's phony to say that I claim title to that property if I've ignored my rights for almost a century. Somebody slept on their rights for almost 100 years, and we're still dealing with an issue. When do we complete that cycle?
Now, the descendants of Morgan Strickland, of his family, what do you say to them?
When I've lost something, particularly my farm or my land, if I feel that's unjust, what invigorates me any more than to go protect that? Federal courts were wide open at that time. They were present to do that.
You don't feel that there's any, if not legal, moral obligation on the part of this community to make this right?
I feel compassion to the point of, should our community say this is something we should address? You know, it's a difficult question. I mean, I feel that sorriness for them. I feel that compassion, but, you know, it's been a long time. Let me ask you a question. What if your grandfather grew up here? Do you owe reparations because he grew up here? Because of a regional presence, do you think that you're responsible for reparations? Do you think taxpayers should pay?
Your report echoes exactly that sentiment, that the black community is not due reparations for land that was lost during this racial cleansing.
Cleansing is an incredibly offensive word.
What happened here, and the historical record is extremely clear, is that a person of color in this community, they were ordered to leave. And they weren't ordered to leave because they had done anything wrong. They were ordered to leave because they were black. That is a racial cleansing. I think Phil Bettis embodies the kinds of contradictions and problems that the county itself faces. He has fashioned what is basically a fable of what took place in Forsyth County. And the fable goes that, yes, there were unfortunate things that happened. Yes, some blacks were threatened, but we bought the land from those people who left. And so there really was no injury. And that's a very comforting story. It's not a true story, but it's a comforting story.
Whose story is the true story? Who has a right to the land? The whites who live on it now, or the blacks who abandoned it in terror in 1912? I don't know. One thing is certain, how valuable the property and homes are today.